I have to say, I'm excited about all these sessions. Are you kidding? But this is something that I think this is going to resonate with a lot of people. This next panel. We know in transition work across the different populations that transitioning individuals may find tasks and responsibilities of living in their own communities challenging. We know that once people transition, they may have never lived alone before, right? Have we supported people who have that dynamic? Yep. They need support in better understanding how to navigate their communities, how to navigate household management, how to live as independently as possible, recognizing that none of us are truly independent. We're all interdependent, but certainly supporting folks to have the tools and the resources and the skills they need to thrive in their communities once they transition home. And our next panel, which has been wonderfully coordinated by our wonderful Renee Cummings, is a wonderful panel from our Centers for Independent Living Network in our state. And before today, how many people have heard of the CILs before today? How many people have heard of them? It's looking like about half. Okay, well, you all are in for, I think, a real treat. The Centers for Independent Living, and they're going to do their own introduction, but the Centers for Independent Living really are part of the foundational disability rights movement that really has supported over time since when were you all conceptualized? 1960s, 70s, yeah, the 1960s and 70s. To really serve as an organized voice for disability rights, and to really serve as, I think, a very powerful engine for supporting systems to better support those rights. So I am really excited that we have such a strong network in the state. They are not statewide, which is, I think, sad, but we're hopefully going to get there eventually. But they really do serve as incredible resources for not just for all disabilities. So with that, I'm going to stop stuttering and hand it over to Renee to introduce your panel.
Okay. Actually, Keith and I had this little demonstration, but Trish already did it. I was going to say, how many of you have ever heard of Centers for Independent Living? And then to illustrate audio description, I was going to have Keith say, how many was that? But anyway, but yeah, Trish said it was about half the room, so you did the audio description for me. I'm going to do kind of what Linda Kendall Fields did in giving a quick background on centers, but first I want to introduce the whole panel so you'll know who we are, and then we'll start in at that point. I am Renee Cummings. I'm from the center that serves the Triangle area here, and we are Alliance of Disability Advocates. To get that on the slide, we go by the logo ADA star CIL, and the star means that we're in the capital. So,
good morning. My name is Keith Greenarch. I am with the Adaptables Center for Independent Living, and we're located in the Winston-Salem area. And each center has its own catchment area, and as Trish said, the entire state is not covered. I think it's 42 counties that have centers for independent living.
we're going to be selfish.
Good morning. I'm Becky Tyndall. I work for Disability Advocates and Resource Center. We call it DARC. We're in the heart of pirate country in Greenville, North Carolina, and I see a lot of UCU fans. Welcome. We're serving Beaufort, Pitt, and Wilson County.
I'm Janine Moran. I'm with the Joya Shabbat Center. We serve Guilford County, Randolph County, Alamance County, Caswell County, Rockingham. Okay, thanks, Mark. I've been with them 10 years, and I am their transition coordinator, both for youth and adults. And I'm also an options counselor and disability advocate.
Okay, so we're not going to test you on all that because the first slide, go to the slide, we actually have a map here of where the Centers for Independent Living are at this particular point in time in North Carolina. And the four of us, we actually represent half of those centers, the 4 out of the 8 centers. As you can see on the map, we start way in the western part of North Carolina, and we do span the state, but everywhere you see one of those counties that's not colored in by the color that is coding for each of our catchment areas we serve, those are counties that are currently not served by a Center for Independent Living. And as was mentioned, hopefully, though, that is the mission or the purpose of the Statewide Independent Living Council, is to help to develop and support a statewide network of centers. So you can see we still have some work to do in North Carolina. So let's go to the next slide. I want to give you a real quick background on how do we become a Center for Independent Living? How does a Center for Independent Living come into being? Because you may be in one of those areas where we have that need to get a group going and have them on track for hopefully in the future starting another Center for Independent Living. So this is where we come from. We have to start out as grassroots advocacy organizations, and all of us represent groups that came together as volunteers. The one in this area, we called ourselves Disability Advocates, and we had people like Ron Mace, who was the father of the concept of universal design. He was part of our group, and Ken Franklin, who was a previous director of the Office on the Americans with Disabilities Act. We all just came together as volunteers to do what Trish mentioned, and that was to work on disability rights and to further disability rights and accessibility and inclusion in the community. So every center has that background. That's how we all started. At some point, you have to move to having your own 501c3 nonprofit status, because beyond that point, hopefully, a competitive grant application opportunity will become available. And if you put in a fundable competitive grant application, you will get federal funding to start a Center for Independent Living. So we are all federally funded. Our services are free, like was mentioned yesterday by Disability Rights North Carolina. Because we're mandated under a federal law, we can go beyond our federal mandate of what we have to do in order to become a Center for Independent Living, but we're held responsible by federal law to meet those mandates. So when you look at the rest of the things that we're required to be before we can even be considered, in that competitive grant application, we have to prove that our grassroots advocacy organization is community-based, and that goes back to what Linda was saying about it takes a team. I always say, as small nonprofits, which all of us are, the only way that we can really get the job done, because there is so much need out there in the community, is through a lot of networking and a lot of collaboration. It does take a team. So we are always bringing other people to the table that can play a key role in whatever it is that we're trying to address. Now, what are we trying to address? That's up to the consumer. We also have to prove that we are going to operate not only by independent living philosophy, because that's absolutely necessary, but independent living philosophy means you are consumer controlled. So what did that mean when we were a grassroots advocacy organization? It meant that we had to be a majority of people with disabilities. When you become a Center for Independent Living, it means that your nonprofit board has to be a majority of people with disabilities. Your decision makers in your center have to be a majority of people with disabilities. Your staff as a whole, taken all together, has to be a majority of people with disabilities. And that consumer that comes to you is the one that is going to drive the process. They can tell you, because they are an expert on their own life, what is it that they feel like that they want or need to make their life better. So that's the part that's consumer controlled. We also have to prove in that competitive grant application, in order to be funded as a center and then to continue operating as a center, we have to be cross-disability. You can't just be a group of people that got together because, oh yeah, I have vision loss. I'm going to get a bunch of my friends and neighbors together that have vision loss, and we're going to just start a little group and we're going to apply to be a center. That's not going to work because we are all ages, all abilities. So Damie asked a question before about mental health. Yes. Anything that comes under the federal definition of a limitation in one or more life activity, doesn't matter what that is, and it's up to you to tell me your story. You don't have to use the word disability. You don't have to come up with that definition. You don't have to say, I have this limitation. No, you tell me your story. Our staff recognizes, okay, what you're saying is that you used to go to the theater and you enjoyed live plays and you really liked the theater a lot. But now that you have hearing loss, your hearing isn't what it used to be, you're finding that you only understand about half of what the people are saying on the stage. I know you have a limitation in major life activity because for you that was a major life activity, and we can work on that. And you never once had to say, I have a disability, but our staff knows. So that's what you're describing. As long as you come in under the circumstance or your story tells us you are a person that is being limited in a major life activity. Maybe it's because you're aging into your disability, which is how a lot of people get there with hearing loss. I got there with 2 severe middle ear infections, but there's various ways to get there. And that's why we're all ages, all abilities. So you have to be cross-disability. You have to be consumer controlled. I left out one. What did I leave out? Before I get to non-residential. Oh, I already mentioned cross-disability. I'm sorry. Community-based, cross-disability, and consumer controlled. Okay. And then this non-residential comes in there because, like Trish mentioned, when Ed Roberts was turned away from the University of California at Berkeley because he was deemed, quote, we don't use this kind of language anymore, but he was called infeasible to ever be able to work. So he was never going to be able to be employed. He's the one that spearheaded, let's start these Centers for Independent Living. Let's go through this same process, which was not in the law, but the law was patterned after what Ed Roberts actually did. So he got a group together and they began assisting one another, and they eventually started the Center for Independent Living in Berkeley, California, and that just really caught fire. And all across the nation, those centers began to pop up, and that's how, by the time the Rehabilitation Act was reauthorized in 1978, Centers for Independent Living were written in there to be federally funded. That's what started this process that I just walked through. But after you advance a little bit in time, independent living got co-opted, and assistive living and all these things that were applied to residential entities. And so that's why this is added in there to clear up the confusion. We are not housing, we are not congregate living, we are non-residential, and that's why that appears in the law. Okay, if you can prove that you can do those things and a whole lot more, because I wrote the grant and writing a federal grant is a great experience. I don't want to do it day in, day out, but you know, I learned a lot. If you get the competitive grant funding, which we did in 2003, then this is what, on the next slide, the federal law says you will do in exchange for being federally funded, being able to offer your services free. You can offer services beyond this that you could do as fee-for-service, but all of us and all of those centers on that map, this is what we do consistent across all centers. This is what you can call upon us and know for sure you will get assistance with any of these. We are mandated to do advocacy, and that's both individual advocacy and systems advocacy, because sometimes the problem is in the system. And instead of approaching it one by one, we need to address, okay, let's look at this system-wide. When the automatic teller machines were not accessible for all of us that can't read that screen, they didn't talk to us, they didn't tell us how to walk through, that was a systems advocacy issue. I was one of the claimants in this area, and now you've got talking ATMs. You're welcome. Actually, I needed it as much or more than anybody, so I was very willing to be a part of that. And so that's an example of systems advocacy. We do peer mentoring and support. Forgive me if I don't get these in the order on the slide, but I know my 8 things I need to say to you. So peer mentoring and support. That's why we have to be people with disabilities, because when that consumer comes in, they are talking to a peer. I may not have the exact same disability, although I can cover a lot of them for you, but I can talk about my lived experience as a person with a disability, and that's what we're looking for. That's the peer mentoring and support piece. Plus, I may know another consumer, a volunteer, another professional, or someone that I think, oh, you know, this is a person that would be really good for you to talk to because they could do some peer mentoring for you. This happens a lot with our youth. And that has been a real passion of mine, because looking back on my own experience as an adolescent and a young adult, I did not have that role model. I did not have that peer mentor, and I can see what a gap that left in my own lived experience. So I am thrilled that centers now are mandated, and I'll get to that one in a minute, but we are mandated to address that gap now, and I'm very happy to see that. We do independent living skills training, and that's going to be the bulk of what we're going to share with you today. When somebody asks me, how do you define what is an independent living skill? Well, of course, you all would be able to pass this test because you just heard what I said. The consumer identifies what is that independent living skill. But the way I identify it or define it is anything that someone would like to learn because it will add to their quality of life. So in my center, one of my staff, my former staff, she left us and retired. I was very sad to see her go, but Karen is a person with total vision loss who navigates with a guide dog, and she plays in the community competitive bridge. All she asks is that they play with her cards, which are brailled and large print. She's depending on the braille, but she wanted to make them accessible for anyone that would still like to play bridge that now needs the large print cards, which this is an aging population, so that was really a good thinking on her part. I watched Karen play one time. Any of you who know bridge, you won't get this if you don't, but she bid a 6 no trump and she made it, and I said, never going to play against that woman. She taught every Friday afternoon, week after week, a whole group of people who said, I never could learn bridge because it goes too fast. Or, you know, a person with a cognitive disability, an intellectual disability, a stroke survivor, people with vision loss. They all got together and had bridge afternoon every Friday, and you could hear laughter coming from our conference room. They were having a great time. So it could be anything like that. Earlier it was mentioned, how do you transfer if you use a mobility device and you need to learn how to transfer and transfer safely? That's an independent living skill. It can be anything, and you're going to hear more about that. That is defined by the consumer, and as much as we can, we try to find, if we can't do it on our staff, if we can't do it among the people that we can tap into in our volunteers, our board members, somebody that we know, we'll research it and find somebody that can assist. Because if you want to learn that because it'll add to your life, go for it. So that's an independent living skill. We do a lot of information and referral, but we don't just send somebody and say, oh, this is who you need to talk to, here's a phone number, have a nice life. No, we work with them and say, you call them. If you want me to call them with you, you can come in and we'll call them together. If you want me to help you to kind of role play what you want to say, whatever it takes, we'll work with you on that, and then we'll make sure that you got what you were looking for. Because there's nothing worse than people who get to us after they've been through the whole, you know, round and round and round, and you know when they call and they're exasperated, and it's like, I've been to so many people and they just keep sending me to somebody else, so we don't want to ever do that. Then the last, transition services. This is the core service that was just mandated under the law when it was reauthorized last July of 2014. But we all knew that language had been waiting, sitting on the back burner for 16 years. Never mind that the Congress has a mandate to reauthorize a law every 5 years. It got reauthorized in 1998. Okay, 98 to 2014, something went wrong there. But it finally got reauthorized, and now all centers do transition services. That means youth services, like Jeannie mentioned, because youth have so many transitions. It may mean, how do you go from pediatric health care to adult health care? Because that looks completely different. How do you go from being in K through 12 where you had the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act helping you out with what you needed to now you're going to go to vocational training or you're going to go to post-secondary education. Nobody's going to advocate for you. You've got to be your own best advocate. How does that look? People that are going through these transitions, transitioning from living at home to living on your own, there's lots of transitions for youth. They need lots of assistance. That's now one of our mandates. Transitions to community-based living. That's where we come in with what we're talking about in this Transitions Institute. So all of the ways that people can be coming back out into the community. A big part of that is money follows the person. Like Trish said, that's very specific though. If a person does not meet those parameters, we don't just say, oh, we tried. No, we have other ways of working with people, and we have a federal mandate. We are the one organization right now that has this federal mandate that you will help people to transition back to community-based living. So we've got a lot of those community resources, and I mentioned that we have to be community-based. This is why we have to be so connected into our community, and we scramble and we call on those resources and we find a way to see what we can do to make that happen. If it's not going to be able to happen under Money Follows the Person, there are other ways, and that's what we will explore, and hopefully that's what we will make happen. But it takes that team. Once again, appreciate what Linda shared there. It definitely takes that team, because we are just the small nonprofit that is trying to pull all those puzzle pieces together and finally have a picture instead of little jigsaw puzzle glimpses. And in the last of our 8 things that we're federally mandated to do is diversions from institutions. If we can work with a person, if we know they're running into trouble, and we can help them out at that point and put some things into place and keep some catastrophes from happening, that's the best of all worlds. We can divert them having to go into an institution and then have to work on if they want to come back in the community. So that's part of our 8 core services that we're mandated to do. So that's our little quick and dirty, what are Centers for Independent Living? There'll be a test later. I'm sure you can all pass. But I'm going to throw this to my colleagues here now to just go through some examples of just a really small range of what we do as it relates to some specific independent living skills that we know are absolutely necessary for our individuals who are transitioning to community-based living. So whoever wants to jump in on the first one.
I keep forgetting I've got my own mic up here. Good morning again. I'm going to talk a little bit about budgeting, banking, and financial credit. I have 2 consumers that I'm working with now that have physical disabilities, no cognitive, no learning disabilities have been identified, but they have been institutionalized for so long in a skilled facilities, they've almost reached the point that they don't care. I went in on the first day to meet one of them, and I said, we were talking about transitioning out, and I said, well, let's just start with the basics. How much money have we got to work with here? It's kind of like redoing a bathroom. What's your budget, and where can we get started? I don't know. You know, my sister always took care of my check before I got here, and it all goes to the facility now, and I get $30 a month. I don't know. So as an independent living counselor, I said, well, you've got a homework assignment to do. I could pretty well guess that he was getting the $733 a month, But I wanted him to know that. And I wanted him to do part of the legwork to figure that out. And I said, you can either have a conversation with the Social Security office, you can talk with a social worker here in the facility, and these are the questions that you need to ask. And so we continued the rest of the interview, and I went back in about 3 days later to check with him, and I said, did you find out the amount of your check? Oh, yeah, $733. I said, not a lot of money, is it? So, but from that point, he had bought in to the importance of the money. Like, we all know how important it is to have the money to be able to do these transitions. I've got him bought into it. And we sat down and actually made out a budget. He had an idea that he was going to move into the nice student apartments that were right across from the nursing home, brand new, state-of-the-art. They rent for $1,300 a month, I think. I told him that probably wouldn't happen. And we started looking at more realistic places that he could go to. So we spend, especially with my folks who have been institutionalized for a long period of time, we do a lot of budgeting things. I'm also working with another young man that we're not only, in Greenville, we're not only transitioning out of skilled nursing facilities, adult care homes, but also we have a very large homeless shelter. A lot of folks with disabilities do end up with a shelter, and worked about a month ago transitioning a young man out of there. He was working part-time, and that's what got him in trouble, because he was still keeping his Social Security check. And remember, they talked about yesterday, you have opportunities that if you make 1 penny more than what Social Security says, Social Security will snatch that check back. Well, that's happened to him at least one other time, and because of that, he lost his apartment and ended up in the homeless shelter. So we worked to get him transitioned back to an apartment, and then have done counseling and counseling. We've brought in peer counselors, we brought in Social Security folks to work with him, and he has it all laid out on a piece of paper on his refrigerator. His challenge is he works at a restaurant, and he's the finest, most expensive restaurant in Greenville is where he works, where you go in there and you pay $200 for a meal. I've never been, but whatever. But I understand it's delicious. Actually met the chef the other night, so that'll be fun. But he's the dishwasher there. And he and I talk about he's got the most important job in that restaurant, because if you're buying a $200 meal and it's on a dirty plate, are you paying for that meal? No. So he gets to share in the tips with all the waiters and the waitresses. And you can never predict that. They may have one customer one night, they may have 20 the next, they may have 50 the next, and you never know what the tips are going to be. So working with him to get that managed so that he can, and we're also having to get his employer involved so that we can get those tips managed so that he can keep his budget straight.
Did anybody want to add anything to that, or we can move on to the next one? Okay. Gone. Okay, home management and organization. Sometimes people have never actually had to manage their own apartment or their own home environment, or know how to organize it, even how to set it up. So these seem like pretty basic skills, and in many ways they are, but they're really necessary. Like, what if you've never done your own laundry? Do you know that you can't just throw everything in there together, and that your reds are going to change your whites into a off color for you? There are all kinds of things that if people have never actually done home management and organization, never set up and maintained and managed their own home environment, they may need to take a look at those kind of skills and develop some of those skills. Is there anyone who wants to add something on one of these?
This can be so varied. You know, people leave facilities and home and group homes, and they have different diets. So oftentimes I've gone grocery shopping, learned to read diabetic stuff for people, given education about how to control your salt intake, or how to prepare a meal. If you have a traumatic brain injury, will you remember to turn off the stove? I happened yesterday, I heard somebody say somebody got an induction stove so their house won't burn down. Most of the people that I work with can't afford that or don't have access to get that kind of material, so you have to come up with creative and inventive ideas to make it as safe as possible for them, using timers and repetitive actions, cue cards and sticky notes, whatever's available. So one of the key things with these kind of skills trainings is you just have to find out what it is the person needs to know and what they want to know, and then try to formulate the way that they can comprehend it. And a lot of it is just going back over and over things with them. Repetition works well.
And I have to say that doing transitions and doing what we do, it's very rewarding. And one of the biggest things is forming that relationship with the person that you're working with. And one of the things that we did is we talked about one of our core services is peer support. And that's somebody that can sit down with the individual and let them know, you know, I am a person with a disability, but I've also been in your shoes. You know, we might not have the same disability, but, you know, I have been institutionalized. I spent 364 days in a hospital, never left the campus of the hospital. So I know what it is to be there and not have support as far as community supports. Had very good family support, had a lot of support from the staff as far as the hospital while I was in, but I never knew anything about past those four walls once I came out. You know, who could I depend on? You know, and I almost got to the point to where, wow, I'm afraid to leave because what happens if I get in trouble? You know, who can I call? So building the relationship with that consumer is one of the most key things that you can do. And that's one of the things that Centers for Independent Living do better than anyone. Because we're not on that billable hour. You know, we can spend as much time as we need finding resources, and we go above and beyond, because I don't think there's any other service that's out there, organizational-wise, that can spend the time and find the resources that folks need to be independent. You know, helping them be self-advocates. Most folks do. When they are looking at advocacy for themselves, you know, they also want to look past, you know, what can I do for the next person? You know, how can I, you know, make this a teachable moment for someone else? So in everything that we do and all the skills that we do, I really feel that the peer support is the most important, because once you get that trust and you get that consumer to trust you, and they know that you're not going to just send them down some path that they're going to come to a dead end. You're going to walk with them. So the other things that we do, it makes it much more simple for the entire process. If you do that first, you get that trust and you build that relationship, and then, you know, we start going into, you know, the bill management, the meal preparation, because they know that you're going to be with them and help them provide. You're going to provide them with the information. Or it's like Renee said, if we don't know, you know, we will go find it for you. And I think that's something that when you're working with someone that's transitioning, think about calling your Center for Independent Living and let us get involved also. Because we can help you to help do your job better.
Okay, thanks. Let's look at relationship training. A lot of times people really have not developed the skills to relate successfully in whatever that relationship happens to be. Sometimes it's a roommate relationship, because a lot of times the key to getting some of our consumers back into the community is to have them move into a roommate situation. And that's for various reasons. It may be because of, like what Becky was talking about, that'll certainly make their finances go farther, but it also might be because there could be an exchange of services. Maybe one person, meal preparation, just simple meal preparation, is really not a problem for them and they can handle that, but because of their disability, maybe managing like the bill organizing and bill paying is not their strong suit, but it may be the person who says, but I can't get into the kitchen and really do meal preparation. It just, it doesn't work for me. So sometimes it's on the basis of you guys would be a good match because there would be a nice trade of services there, if you want to look at it that way, that you could, as roommates, but how do you relate to one another as roommates? So that may be a really key issue that we need to take a look at in terms of roommate relationships. But we do healthy relationships from my center, and because youth services is now added to all of our Centers for Independent Living, I think we're all eventually going to be looking at building healthy relationships wherever someone is in the lifespan, but certainly for those youth and young adults, because there are many issues that nobody ever talked to them about, and one of the reasons in some cases is because of their disability. For example, if a person has an intellectual disability, I've had so many parents say to me, oh, well, my daughter is never going to date, my daughter is never going to get married, my daughter is never going to whatever. And you all heard Betsy McMichaels yesterday, and I know her daughter Janie really, really well. And, if that person wants to do any and all of these, and you also heard yesterday that you do not have your right to get married taken away from you, even if you're going through that guardian process and you've done the hearing that says that you've been deemed incompetent in some areas, but, nobody said you can't get married. So we do a lot of working with individuals, and they are all ages. Nellie in my center has gone to the RSI in Chapel Hill, which is Rehabilitation Services Incorporated, which is a large group home, and most of the people in her healthy relationships class were like 40-something, 50-something, but they'd never had this information. So I'm not going to go into detail in all of these, but one of them that I do want to highlight, when you have a group like my staff, they love to do things in an interactive way because they recognize that, especially with youth and young adults, but I think with all of us, everybody doesn't learn by just seeing information. Everybody doesn't learn by just hearing information. For some people, it's that tactile kinesthetic element of actually doing something. So communication skills. One of the ways that I've seen my staff do communication skills is with a bunch of hard-boiled eggs, and everybody gets a partner, and you go outside. You don't do it in a lovely room like this. You go outside to the parking lot, and then with your partner, you discuss what is a passive communication. And then you pick a partner, a team, and say, okay, show us what that looks like. You got to get that egg over to your partner, but do it in a passive communication way. So you can imagine a lot of eggs get lobbed and splattered on the pavement. And then they talk about aggressive communication. Okay, now this team gets to show what's an aggressive communication look like. And that's always a lot of fun because the partner that's supposed to be catching that egg is most likely going to get really splattered. And then they have to show what's an assertive communication look like. And you've got to get that successfully to your partner in a way that the communication was successful. So that's where the skill comes in. But it's amazing how many people get it after they go through that. And then you start talking about, okay, what's an assertive way for you to talk to your family member, your friend, your romantic partner, whoever it happens to be, to get your message across? So that's just one illustration of communication skills and the fact that a lot of times we take it to a level of not, we're just going to give you the information. We're going to try to hit those different modalities that we know people learn and people remember and people understand in many different ways. So that's just one of the ways I've seen my staff doing healthy relationships and trying to do communication skills. That works when you've got more than just a one-on-one, but I've seen that be really, really successful with a group of people. And one of the things that they do address is sex education, because a lot of times this is a population of people that were excluded when any of that information was provided in like K through 12 public schools. Hopefully that's becoming more inclusive, but with the populations that we're seeing now among our youth and young adults, they were left out, and they have questions. And unfortunately, we know that that's the population, people with disabilities in general, but people with intellectual and developmental disabilities especially, they are victimized at a rate way higher than the general population. So they're the people that need this information. They need to understand about boundaries, which is such a nebulous concept. Boundaries? What does that mean? So in relationship training, using like hula hoops or ropes or something, they illustrate putting people in different circumstances and show me where you think it's a good distance that you'd be comfortable with. That's your boundary. So relationship training, I wanted to throw that in just because I think that for a lot of people coming out of institutions, and I know several panel members, Keith just mentioned it, if you're in there long enough, you do get institutionalized, and you have an institutionalized mindset, and you may not realize, you may have forgotten, or it may be really a rusty kind of concept for you, that you have a right to advocate for yourself. You have a right to voice what you want and what your needs are and what you would like to have happen for your own life. And that takes some time sometimes to work with people on all of these concepts that feed into relationship training. Anybody want to say anything on that?
I like your mic. One of the first persons I institutionalized went to the institutionalization following a pretty massive car accident when she was 17. She actually quit school at 16 and went to work, and was driving home one night after work and left the road, and the rest is history. She stayed in an institution for almost 20 years. Because there weren't any. She went to an institution in like 1978 and stayed in there till the early 90s. But she had become so institutionalized. I want to talk a little bit about this being institutionalized. When we started talking about transitioning, one of the first questions that she asked me is, well, where's the call button going to be? Well, there might not be one, but we're going to have this and this and this and this and this. And she said, well, still, where's the call button going to be? And what I learned through this process is she had been institutionalized so long, her greatest fear that terrorized her, it wasn't a fear, it was a terror, was being alone in an apartment all by herself. And so we looked at apartments, and the more we looked at apartments, the more she backed away. And so I sat down and I kind of left her alone for a couple of months. I said, well, we need to kind of back off and kind of problem solve this. So we backed off, and she called me about 4 months later and says, I found a solution. I said, Frida, what have you done now? She said, this lady's going to buy me a house. And then I really thought she was taking good drugs. But lo and behold, she had found a benefactor who was going to buy her a house that was large enough that would be for her and 2 other friends that she had identified from the same facility with disabilities. And they were going to live there like roommates. We moved from that point to, well, we'd found the house, and we went to the landlord and said, how much is the rent going to be? Oh, about $1,200 a month. Oops, can't quite do that. So we started working with the local housing authority and learned that there's just a little niche in the law that if they have some spare Section 8s, they can actually assign Section 8s like 3 to one house. We got that exception in place. That took a while, but we still got it in place. Vocational rehab got involved because all 3 of these folks had now become VR clients and did the modifications to the house. So we built in Greenville what's now called a shared living house. And they live like roommates. And they fight and they fuss like roommates.
Okay, we're going to move on to, we're going to run out of time. I think the next is travel. I just want to talk about travel training. And I know you heard this from, it might have been Linda, talking about you don't assume. I guess it's easy sometimes to just assume that everybody knows about public transit and, you know, how to ride and navigate public transit, but that's not so. We as centers work with folks as we do consumer control, as we talked about. They come to us and, this transit system, or, the bus system, public transit, the public bus, I can't figure it out. So we work with them and looking at the schedule, and in Winston-Salem, now we have an app, got an app for that, So we've even had some of our staff teach consumers and work with them on using the app for the schedules and, how to navigate the public transit. Which bus goes where, get them to the right places, and get on the bus and ride with them. The paratransit, there's application fee. Application process rather. In Winston-Salem, it's 16 pages long. So we help them to navigate that. We also have resources for driver education. Help in the licensing. They may need more time. They may need, a different format. So we go and ask for a reasonable accommodation of whatever they need to look at their driving and to get licensed. We've done that many, many times. Anyone have a comment on?
Keith let me know, he's my timekeeper, that we're running out of time. So I'm going to just zip through these last two, but I do want to echo what Keith just said. We have dealt with, in our center, so many people that said, I couldn't understand driver's ed because of the pace it was being taught. And so we have gotten, our staff, a lot of individuals to the point of passing that driver's ed exam, but they just needed somebody to do a lot more slower pace, break it down, a lot of repetition, whatever it happened to be. But that's really important. And then beyond that, like Keith said, we do work with people on how to understand the transit systems. You're going to have a whole session on housing, so I'm just going to kind of zip through housing. But I do want you, if we have a minute or two, to ask Jeannie the question about the man who loves trains, and we'll come back to that. Job readiness, that's another IL skill that is really, really important. And we've done a lot of looking at different issues that interplay there. And if you have any questions, find any of us later, because as you can see, we can talk a lot and we can tell you all kinds of stories, and that's why we're running out of time. But I want to zip to the last slide, which has a link, and this is considering assistive technology, because we know that sometimes it's the technology that's the key that makes many things possible. And I have two great examples, and you're just going to have to ask me about it later because we don't have time. I just wanted to show you, though, that we're not talking so much in terms of assistive technology anymore. We're just talking about technology. These smartphones, there's an app for everything. You can download an app. I can put an app on here that'll tell me the color of the clothes in my closet so that I make sure that when I go out that day, I'm not looking something atrocious. And if I am, I can say, well, it was just my fashion statement. But there's an app for everything. This is just a simple little pocket recorder. A lot of people, we encourage them, just take this with you and just dictate little short notes or make memos to yourself, or, in those alarms that Jeannie was mentioning, whatever it takes. These things are very helpful and very available, and it's just technology. This you paid for, thank you. This is an iBill. This is free from your federal government. It's a currency reader. It'll tell you what bill you have. It's a result of a claimants filing a lawsuit against our government because our paper money is not accessible. This was a trade-off. They'll give anybody who needs a currency reader free of charge from the Bureau of Engraving and Printing. You just have to apply for this and you can get one of these and you can set it on various modes. I did something this morning and I got it stuck on vibrating. A lot of people keep it on vibrating so I can put a $20 bill in there and it's not going to say 20 and let everybody know, oh, what's that? She's got a $20 bill. So you can set it on vibrate and it's the vibrations that tell me according to how many vibrations, whether it's a 1, a 5, a 10, a 20. It goes up to 100. I have never tested it with a $100 bill. If anybody has one, I'll test it for you. Okay, let's go into looking at this link on, and this is how we're going to end, because the bottom line take-home message of this little video, this is just a YouTube video that I wanted to show you of this gentleman using technology to continue pursuing his favorite pastime, even though he's acquired a disability. And the bottom line take-home message is never make assumptions. Okay? So Keith told me in this 3-day weekend he's going to go out and try this extreme sport. Okay, I think we really ate up our time. I appreciate everybody. I know, like I said, we can really talk. So be sure and ask Jeannie, though, about the man who loved trains.
You all, thank you. This was an amazing session. I hope it was relevant and helpful. Yeah, thank you all. I do want to make sure we have time for questions, though, because this has been a very important topic. Yeah, we definitely have a question. So do we have a mic in the back? Yep. And who's our next question? We'll take at least 3. Okay, right there. So we'll go to Debbie next.
All right. Do Centers for Independent Living help folks connect with roommates through any sort of service?
Yeah, we have done that as far as, we'll have somebody contact us and then we'll kind of look through the consumers that we're in touch with and maybe have them ask around and see if we can find somebody, because we have done those kind of matches that I mentioned before where we feel like, okay, you guys would be ideal because one of you can do something that'll be really helpful to your roommate, and in return, that can be that person's responsibility. So it's kind of like a time banking exchange of services sort of thing. So we have done that. And ideally, we can come up with that. We can't always, but we try.
I just want to make a comment about that also. I don't believe in matchmaking, but seriously, if a consumer has that as part of their plan that they want to do, then, what I will do is I will note that, and then if someone else asks, I don't go out promoting that, so to speak, but we do have that available. I know someone, and we put them in touch with them. I don't want to get a call Saturday
Right.
night at midnight and them in a fight,
Right.
I tread carefully with that.
This is more of a situation that wasn't a transition, but she has MS and her husband died suddenly. So some of her income is gone, and she's, pretty dependent in ADLs and IADLs, and she's desperately trying to find a roommate. She's been through church. As a senior resources person, I connected her with the senior center in her area. She's in West Virginia. But a light bulb just went off during your presentation. She's not 60 yet, and there's a center for independent living in her area, so I want to be able
And some centers for independent living have different social events, and she might want to come to that, and she might, find someone that.
Great. Thank you.
I had a question for Keith, and I have one comment. So the one comment, and I posted it yesterday, is that there's nothing free. So I think all of us have to get out of the habit of saying that it's free. It may be at no cost to the consumer, but there's a cost always associated with every service that we provide. So that's the comment. The question is, Keith said that you have all the time in the world to provide time to the consumers, which I find fascinating. So the seal must be heavily funded by this federal grant, or is it all volunteer time?
Well, that's a good question. Both. I mean, we when you say heavily funded, but no. What I meant is, we're not there. I mean, I may be with a consumer for 4 hours, but I want that consumer to have our time, and I want him to be able, or her, to be able to tell me what they need to tell me, and work through what they need as far as that can help them with their goals. And we do have volunteers also. You want to say something?
Well, and the other way that I think that really is important is that there's no time limit on how long a consumer can work with us, because as long as they're driving the process, and we see that when we develop an independent living plan, and here's the part of it that they've agreed that they're responsible for, and then here's what we've agreed that we will do, and as long as they're doing their part and making progress, we're not going to say, but we're only going to work with you for the next, X amount of time. I think Jeannie's a good example of this that she mentioned, and I haven't given you enough time to talk, that she's had some consumers because over time, their plans change. When they achieve a goal, then they have something else they'd like to do, and they come back, and as long as they're actively working with us and all, we will give them that time, and they can keep working with us and keep continuing on their goals. So some of our consumers have been with us for quite a long time, but they're not working on the same thing. They're continuing to progress on what they want for their lives.
Yeah, for instance in that, you get a consumer out of whatever situation they're into, they get into other situations. Stuff that you didn't plan, stuff that you didn't train, stuff happens. So if you've developed that relationship, they know that I'm going to respond to whatever it is they need. Maybe more training and something different, maybe a different community resource. So I can tell you, I've been doing this about 10 years, and one of my first transitions, who actually is still alive and doing really well, I heard from her 2 weeks ago because she has to change where she lives, and so she wants to start a different process to do that. So the longevity, it's not necessarily always the quantity of the time, but it's because you're going to be there when they need you again the next time for whatever it is. Yeah.
You all were about to call it a day on this. Is there one more question? Yeah, please.
I just wanted to comment. It was absolutely wonderful. I learned so much. I can't wait to bring it back to our MCO. But I wanted to add that we need help from you, you need help from us. The induction stone was not free, thank you. It was from grant monies. We're very good at trying to get monies. So sometimes you might want to inquire with the MCO because we're really trying to push the innovative technologies. It's really helping with a lot of folks that we're transitioning, and they may qualify. You know, people just don't go into one section. Sometimes they, you know, can qualify because they have other issues going on. So it's always good to check.
Great thing to end on. You all awesome. All right, well, last thank you. Let's give our panel a round of applause again. Thank you all.